so much.
Good, yeah.
That's nice. You're trying to. I should join the Sierra Club. I like them.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our last Science Monday of the fall semester. We have a treat tonight. We're welcoming a man who's taken on a Herculean task in our state government of great importance to us, the public, and our environmental health. New Jersey's Office of Climate Resilience, which he leads at the Department of Environmental Protection, is a key bulwark between Monmouth County and future climate-related disaster. As Chief Resilience Officer for the state, Nick Angarone is charged with strengthening our resilience to extreme precipitation, flooding, sea level rise, wildfire, extreme heat, and biodiversity threats, and the impact of all of the above on the public, our homes, infrastructure, health, and economic activity. As the most densely populated state in the U.S., New Jersey's people are heavily exposed to climate change risks. As New Jersey's Chief Resilience Officer, Nick Angarone coordinates statewide policy on climate resilience and serves as Vice Chair of the state's Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. In that capacity, he leads and directs the development and implementation of a statewide climate change resilience strategy and provides education, training, planning, and technical assistance to local governments to address impacts of climate change. He oversees the Coastal Blue Acres Buyout Program, serves as New Jersey's coastal manager, and administers the New Jersey Coastal Management Program in cooperation with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and a network of programs across DEP. In keeping with his coastal resilience portfolio, he is the Mid-Atlantic representative to the Coastal States Organization, which supports coastal states and U.S. territories for the protection, conservation, responsible use, and sustainable economic development of their coastal resources. Nick Angarone represents NJDEP on the State Planning Commission, ensuring that climate resilience, natural resource protection, and infrastructure capacity are incorporated into the planning process. He is a planner himself, and before joining NJDEP in 2004, he worked at the county level on regional planning, has served as DEP's liaison to the Highlands Council. Nick Angarone's master's degree is in city and regional planning and was at Rutgers' Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. So he is a native who has stayed here. And the Blaustein School awarded him its 2025 Career Achievement Award. We welcome Nick Angarone to a Monmouth County that is projected to have the highest extreme rainfall increases in the New York, New Jersey area, according to the Argonne Labs Climate Risk and Resilience Supercomputer projections. So we are fortunate to have him with us tonight, and thank you for taking your time to be with us. Nick Angarone.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm really happy to be with you here this evening. That was I don't have any real introduction left to provide you. Two notes I will make, I guess. So in one of the, before I was at DEP, you mentioned I worked for, I did some work with county government. At least about a year of that was with Monmouth County Planning. I was doing transportation planning at the time, and I very much learned that I did not enjoy transportation planning. But it's still kind of one of those things that sticks with you, and you understand kind of the basics, which is very helpful in this kind of position I'm in, which is kind of a lot of fingers an inch deep in a lot of things. Other kind of local connection for me is my wife grew up literally around the corner in Lincroft. So it's been a little while since I've been into the area. but it's kind of like old home week. I have a couple of restaurants that I wish I had come out a little bit earlier for. I'm going to talk tonight about climate resilience in New Jersey, largely focusing on the work that I do and that we do in my office. That is not everything that is happening in New Jersey around climate resilience. There are many, many things going on. There are many, many things going on within the Department of Environmental Protection, which I also won't go into this evening. That would be a much longer night. But to start, let's go into let's set the stage with the climate impacts that what we're looking at coming at us. New Jersey wants to make sure that its decisions are based in the most current, best available science. To that effect, back in 2020, we issued New Jersey's first scientific report on climate change that really looked at this global issue and kind of drilled down on kind of what the impacts were going to be to New Jersey, to us in our backyards. We've updated it almost every year since, including updates to precipitation data and projections going out to the end of the century. We've looked at extreme heat. We've looked at the impacts to human health and communities. And I will note that if you follow the Department of Environmental Protection on social media at all, you will see an announcement, I think in the next 3 weeks, about a more comprehensive update to this report. Right, and so some of the major issues that we're dealing with in New Jersey, right, and I'll go through a couple of them. One of the most important, which is I think frequently overlooked, is extreme heat, right, and it's something that we've been focusing on a lot over the last 2 or 3 years, right. New Jersey is warming faster than certainly the rest of the Northeast, and perhaps surprisingly, faster than much of the rest of the country. Right, we know that our summers are warmer, but our winters are warming even faster. I'm not a fan of snow, so if I'm going to find a positive here, it is that. We also know that our heat waves are becoming more extreme and more frequent, and so, right, this is important to not just because, right, it's just an impact of climate change. It has noticeable, appreciable, demonstrable impacts on human health, on our air quality, on our food and water supply, and we are kind of dealing with the impacts of that as we progress through the years here. One of the most important things that we deal with around extreme heat is the urban heat island effect, right? And so this is where kind of that extreme heat creates hazardous conditions in the built environment, right, where we live, and it has a significant heating effect on our based on pavement and buildings, and it warps train tracks, buckles roads. It still surprises me, right, in the middle of heat waves in the summer when I see in New Jersey, right, highways buckling from the heat, right, and we've all seen, talk of the last couple of summers of hell on New Jersey transit, right, partially at least based on the impacts of extreme heat, which warp the wires and result in delays, of course. So what we know about kind of heat and extreme heat, right, is that the areas that that we see kind of have that more significant effect are developed areas, and we see where parks and open space and bodies of water, right, create cooler areas than our developed areas. And those points are made very clear here in this map of this is where we are. Right, you guys all know that. So what you're seeing on this map is that so DEP leveraged satellite analysis data by USGS and created a map showing the land surface temperature for the state in the summer of 2022, right? And so the hotter areas are red, right, and the cooler areas are blue. And so when you look at this map, I think it's big enough for you guys all to see, right? What sticks out at you as the area that are the hottest, that are red? It's parking lots, right? More often than not, it's parking lots, right? And so when you think about, right, kind of what that looks like, perhaps in a more urban, dense area, right, we see very, very significant impacts in our cities, right, which is also where our socially vulnerable populations are centered, right, and they're least able to actually address and can afford to address the impacts of that extreme heat. Right, so extreme heat is also not just about human health and infrastructure, right? It'll also cause damage to our crops and forests. That includes crops that are staples, that are part of New Jersey culture, right? In like blueberries and cranberries. And because of high temperatures, especially during the winter, it's harder for those crops to grow here. Wildlife and our ecosystems will also be impacted, right? And the expectation is that our state bird, right, the American goldfinch, may not be able to nest here as it gets hotter. Wildfire. So more frequent hot and dry periods mean that our wildfire season is getting longer. And we've had some doozies in the last couple of years, right? And so New Jersey's high population density, lots of development, right? It's spreading in sprawl, right? Is spreading into our forest lands and our wildlands, and it increases the likelihood that even small fires will threaten our homes and threaten our infrastructure and our commercial and industrial development. The map up here is showing annual burn probability, right? The potential that a specific geographic area will experience a wildfire over a 1-year period. Darker the color, the higher the probability. There's actually perhaps more in Monmouth County that you might think, but there are only a handful of kind of really kind of areas with a significant wildfire risk. In this case, we're looking at part of Earl Naval Weapons Station. I hope that they, in particular, kind of can manage that, have that under control. Kind of, that's not necessarily where we want to see massive wildfires, where we keep our weapons. Precipitation, right? Increased precipitation is creating more flooding in our inland areas, right? So by the end of the 21st century, heavy storm events are projected to occur 200 to 500% more often and with more intensity than in the 20th century. Right, so this graph is displaying the results of precipitation studies that I mentioned kind of as part of that scientific report. Right, and so what we have seen is over the last 20 years, right, the majority of data, majority of decisions that incorporate precipitation are based on NOAA's Atlas 14, not to get into the weeds, right, but that data was last updated in the year 2000 and doesn't use data past 1999. So one of those studies that we did kind of looked at the increase in precipitation over that time, and what we found is we're 10 to 20%, already 10 to 20% beyond kind of what the NOAA data says. So everything that we've been building up to now has been under-designed, right? Everything for the past, well, everything in the past is not designed, has not been built to actually handle the amount of precipitation that we are currently experiencing, let alone what we are going to experience through the end of the century, right? And we know that the FEMA mapping, right, the mapping that the vast majority of us use to identify flood-prone areas, only looks backwards, right? It looks at historic data to identify kind of the flood-prone areas, right? And so we know that that is not sufficient, and we have experienced more and more frequently, not just in New Jersey, but around the country, that around 30%, 33% of FEMA flood claims after an event are outside of the FEMA mapped floodplains. So here is this is the FEMA mapping up in, this is the northwest corner of Ocean Township. That's Cranberry Brook running along the north side. So after Ida, and based on kind of some of those precipitation studies, New Jersey moved forward with plans to look at what that increased precipitation would mean for identifying flood-prone areas. And for all intents and purposes, we identified that increased precipitation was likely to result in riverine fluvial flooding about 3 feet higher, right, than what we currently see. And then right once you raise it, you got to kind of go out horizontally. And so Rutgers tried to map that. Oh, wrong, too far. And so that darker blue area is the area that we identify now as flood prone, right, from that increased precipitation, right? And this is just one area, you know, in Monmouth that kind of, I thought, made a really good example. But this is what we're seeing across the state, and this is not the most significant area in New Jersey. Sea level rise. All right, and so we are already experiencing sea level rise impacts regularly, right? Whether that is kind of sunny day flooding, right? Flooding that we see just from high tides twice a day, right? Doesn't have to be related to a storm. So we're already seeing these impacts, and we also know that, as you know, when we see coastal storms, those are going to be, the flooding from those storms is going to be worse, right? We in Atlantic City is generally kind of, there's a long-term tide gauge there that is kind of the basis for a lot of data, and we've seen you know, an increase in the rate of sea level rise increase significantly over the last 40 years. And as we plan for development and investments over the next several decades, we have to acknowledge that there are going to be areas that are inundated regularly. Again, right, twice a day, high tide, every 12 hours or so. And sea level rise is rising at a higher rate in New Jersey than it is in the rest of the world. So this report that is on the screen is from a recently released report from the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel that was convened by Rutgers University. It had input from 140 scientists. We have literally the top sea level rise scientists in the world are based in New Jersey. We're really, really lucky to have them here. But what this very complicated table is showing you is kind of multiple emission scenarios, right? So that's kind of the colored bar across the top. And what we are focusing on is that orange block, kind of that's highlighted. And that is an intermediate emission scenario. And these emission scenarios are based on the IPCC reports from a couple years ago. Right, and so what we know is that projection is consistent with kind of global policy on emissions, right? It's not just based on the United States, this is global policy. And what that does is it puts us at about 2.7 degrees warming Celsius by the end of the century. So we're also then focused on the likely range, right? And so what I have highlighted here is that column is for 2100 in that intermediate emissions scenario. And it is looking at what falls within kind of the 66% chance, right, from high to low. The projections all show that, you know, we are likely, is how the scientists describe it, and I am not a scientist, we are likely to fall between 2.2 and 4.5 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Now, what the two numbers we then focus on are this 3.8 and this 4.5, right? And so from a policy perspective, when we start thinking about how do we want to build and where do we want to build, we are looking at the upper end of the likely range, right? We are trying to, and we are intentionally being conservative, protective in kind of how we are determining kind of for policy decisions where in that range we want to look. Now, what gets interesting is this 4.5 number is there's a growing there's some growing data that is telling us that we're starting to get a little more nervous about increasing rate of ice sheet melt, right? And so you perhaps have all heard of the Doomsday Glacier or the Thwaites Glacier, right? And the concern is that with increasing rate of those types of ice sheets, that it's likely that we'll see up to 4.5 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. So up in Keensburg, this is what 4 feet of sea level rise looks like, right? So the blue areas are areas that are inundated twice a day at high tide. The green areas are areas that are lower, that would be inundated, but there's not a direct connection to water. But that you should also understand that that's where water is likely to pool from precipitation and stormwater and the like. Right, so I also mentioned coastal storms. Right, so this is what the FEMA mapping looks like now. This is the current FEMA mapping. That bright blue color is the 100-year storm. The orange is the quote-unquote 500-year storm. For what it's worth, this is the area that would be inundated with about 8 to 9 feet above sea level. And this is what it looks like at 2100, the 1% storm with 4 feet of sea level rise. And so what you're seeing is that yellow area is the additional area that gets inundated by that 1% storm with 4 feet of sea level rise. And it's, if I just go back and forth real quick, it's pretty close to the 500-year. What we have currently mapped is the 500-year storm now. Right, so we're expecting that we're going to see significant impacts from sea level rise, from coastal storms, right? And we just saw a couple nor'easters in the last couple of months, right, with significant impacts to our coasts. All right, so that was the doom and gloom part. Right, so then the question is, what are we doing to plan for and address some of these impacts? And so I'm going to start with a couple statewide policy initiatives. So back in 2019, Governor Murphy issued Executive Order 89 that did a number of things, not the least of which was establish the position of Chief Resilience Officer. So thank you for that, sir. It also established the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, which is presently made up of 26 executive branch departments and agencies. We have met literally every month since December of 2019, and have, if you had told me that kind of back that long ago, that we would have 50 representatives from all these agencies coming together to kind of coordinate on this, I would have thought you were nuts. But it's I think recognized that even if they don't have a specific project that they're working on, that this is important and they want to be involved in the issue. One of the other things that Executive Order 89 required that we do was develop and implement a statewide climate change resilience strategy. And so this is outlined a vision over 127 actions for state agencies to guide state agencies when they're making policy decisions. We kind of have been working on implementing this over the last few years and kind of release annual reports talking about progress. One of the important things that the strategy did was actually define climate resilience for New Jersey. So for any of you nerds out there, I call myself there in that word, but who kind of really focus on kind of the definitions of words. Where we landed was kind of more of a mix between resilience, which kind of, to oversimplify it, is you bounce back, right, from an event, and adaptation, which is kind of, if you think about it, as kind of more forward-looking. And so the definition that we've identified for ourselves here is kind of a mix of those two things, and we kind of think about it as bouncing forward. And this, does guide how state agencies are informing their decisions. The strategy itself is broad, right? And I think should help. This chart helps perhaps explain kind of the breadth of the types of issues we're looking at, right? It's not just kind of building resilient and healthy communities. We want to make sure that our ecosystems are resilient to the impacts of climate change, but also recognize that those ecosystems provide resilience to our communities from the impacts of climate change, right? The ever sexy promote coordinated governance, right, is a significant part of this. Continuing to invest in information, increasing public understanding of the issues, promoting climate-informed investments, right? This is a big one for state government, and if I'm completely honest, probably one of the biggest struggles of state government. And then we also kind of take all these issues and apply them in our coastal zone, right, which has fairly unique impacts that we just went through. So we noticed after the fact, right, so I'm not the first Chief Resilience Officer. That strategy was written by me and a team, but under the direction of the first Chief Resilience Officer. But when I took over just about 4 years ago now, kind of we realized really quickly that we had a gap in that we were focused almost solely on flooding. And we touched forest fire, and we touched extreme heat, and we touched communicable disease and the like, but we had some gaps, and so we focused the last 2 years on heat, and the Interagency Council last year published an extreme heat resilience action plan. So where the strategy was kind of like really high level to help provide guidance to state agencies, the resilience action plan is specific actions that agencies have committed to take to mitigate the impacts of extreme heat, right? So that might be, right, BPU right now has initiated an urban heat island grant program, right? New Jersey Transit is in the process of designing updates to bus stops, right? Maybe not the first thing kind of we think about, but when we about extreme heat, but it is something that has specific impact, again, particularly to our socially vulnerable populations. We have developed what we term Heat Hub NJ. This is intended to be a one-stop shop for kind of all things extreme heat. Just this past year, we had our first ever Extreme Heat Awareness Week, and we've done a series of webinars, the first series of webinars on kind of extreme heat impacts to different kind of sectors of the state, and we will be doing a second round of them in the coming year.
What did you say about the bus stops?
New Jersey Transit is going through a process to design and update designs to their bus stops to consider extreme heat. We also issued just in August, as part of New Jersey's first ever Flood Safety Week, a statewide flood resilience initiatives report. So this doesn't set any new policy because we're already doing a lot in state government around flooding issues. Not everything we could and should be doing, but we are doing a lot. And so this report identifies all of those various activities in one place, and it's more, I think more than most people are expecting. One of the things that we also issued during our Flood Safety Week was a Know Your Flood Risk Mapping tool, right? So we have a whole lot of data on flooding, and this is to help you like kind of look beyond, right, just those FEMA maps and look at kind of your address and places you're interested in and kind of what their risk may be from increased flooding. We also know that climate change has systemic economic risks to New Jersey's economy. And so our Chief Economic Officer at DEP, we worked together to issue this report, Economic Risk of Climate Change in New Jersey, also in the last several weeks. Right, and the kind of the most eye-catching thing for me, right, are these two other points up here. Is kind of the dominoes effect of what this means and the threats to municipal finances, to municipal budgets, right? As we start seeing kind of impacts to property values and then taxation and what that means for municipal finances. This is something that I think we should be a little bit more concerned about, that I think kind of our government and governments are not quite grasping the threat of. This is something that we have talked to kind of like local bonding agencies, right? You know, the companies that evaluate bond ratings for government. And this is something that they're very concerned about, but we haven't seen kind of local governments kind of grasp onto this threat yet. And again, right, we know that the climate change has impacts to tourism. I already mentioned kind of agriculture, right? Two real cornerstones of culture in New Jersey, and right, looking at kind of, and particularly right of our coastal area, tourism is a huge part of that, right? And that is very much under threat as the impacts increase. All right. I'm not deeply involved in the details of our regulations, but I would be hard-pressed not to at least talk about briefly the two big ones that we have adopted in recent years and that we are in the process of adopting now. The first one, the inland flood protection rules, were finally adopted back in the summer of 2023. And this was, again, I mentioned, right, we looked at what that increased precipitation looks like, what we project the increase to flooding looks like for that. And so we have new regulations now, right, that are, to vastly oversimplify, you have to build higher. There's a larger area at which DEP regulates now, which you would need a permit. And it's not talked about much, but it also updates the stormwater regulations, right? So when a development is coming in or transportation project is coming in, they have to deal with that increased precipitation and address the increased rates of stormwater. Right, so kind of think about that as kind of inland, and then we're going through the process of finalizing updates to our coastal regulations, which incorporate sea level rise, right? That 4 feet of sea level rise that I talked about. So again, there's two primary ways which it does that, right? So is the one kind of where I showed you that increased coastal storm flood area, that has the climate adjusted flood elevation is the name in the regs. And to, again, simplify it a bit, it means you have to build 4 feet higher than you would right now. And there's a larger area at which we regulate. The other thing it does is that it identifies what's called an inundation risk zone. So again, these areas that are going to be flooded just from high tide twice a day, you have to do an on-site analysis to identify the risk to whatever you're building. You have to do some type of alternatives analysis for the site. So again, as a simple example, if the back corner is higher, that's where you would be kind of pushed to build kind of the structures. We don't expect that we're denying a whole bunch of projects for this, right? That would be a takings, and that's a whole nother can of worms. But these are two really important aspects that will help ensure that in the case of future coastal storms, be it Sandy or just nor'easters, right, we are building safer, we are putting people out of harm's way. It is not the solution, right, to all climate issues in New Jersey, which is going to need to be kind of a suite of all these things. I mentioned wildfire before, right? We recognize New Jersey's kind of growing wildfire threats, and so we launched what's called NJ Wildfire Smart. We really like acronyms in New Jersey government, so there is an acronym here, but it's a series of actions, kind of that emphasize the importance of wildfire safety, mitigation awareness response training. You can find more information on Wildfire Smart. The mapping that I showed you is part of the awareness. There are multiple mapping tools that'll help you kind of identify wildfire risk. All right, that title got a little messed up, but a lot of what I do within kind of my Office of Climate Resilience is support local resilience planning. And we do that in a number of ways. Again, I'm a planner, so a lot of my time is focused on helping communities understand their vulnerabilities and help them identify what they want to do about it. One of the earliest projects we had undertaken was Two Rivers, One Future. The FRAMES was another acronym. I don't even remember what the acronym stands for anymore. But Two Rivers, One Future was catchier. But it was based around the Shrewsbury and Navesink rivers, right in these 15 municipalities in Monmouth County. And we worked with those local governments over, I think, about 2 years to identify kind of what their flood risks were from coastal storms, right? We were very focused post-Sandy on kind of sea level rise and storm surge and the like. And identified for them, again, their vulnerabilities. And in all the work that we do here, when we work with our local governments, we're helping those local governments identify what they want to do about these risks, right? This is not state government coming to these municipalities and telling them what they have to do. Now, we set some parameters around planning, what we do in planning, but it's really, a very robust and community-led process. And so some of the things, right, that we did is we identified hotspots, and we make recommendations for the communities for different ways to address that. And you see some of those pink dots on the maps here that are different types of actions that they can take. And we did this throughout that region. We finished this planning process, issued a report in December of 2019, and 3 months later, we were working from our basements and our kitchens, and we never really got to kind of move this into implementation. It's still, it's a 6-year-old plan at this point. The sea level rise numbers are a little lower than what we're kind of working with these days, but I still think it's a valid plan. I still think the vision here makes sense. But that was our first regional planning effort, which led to our standing planning program, which is called Resilient NJ. And so this was launched from another federal grant. And it is Resilient NJ is our planning and technical assistance program for the state. And it is made up of multiple pieces, right? There's regional planning programs, right? And so those groups of blue municipalities are where we did some regional plans, and I'll touch on them in a minute. Where we can find some, dimes and quarters under the couch cushions, we put together programs and try and help individual municipalities. And so you can see those identified in green areas. We have an online toolkit, right, to help local governments go through this process themselves. And we have a funding directory for resilience-related funding, which, again, all of which I'll touch on momentarily. So those different regions were the first, after the FRAMES project, were the kind of 4 that we focused on for the next few years, right? And they're very diverse geographically, socioeconomically, demographically, and kind of the vision for the vulnerabilities for what they were seeing, right, what they were experiencing, what was projected for them, were also fairly different. They all also had different priorities, right? Northeastern New Jersey, up in Newark and Jersey City and Hoboken and Bayonne, they were very focused on infrastructure, right? And there's a lot of state and national and internationally important infrastructure there, and they were very interested in how do we better coordinate all those aspects, of that infrastructure. in like LBI, they were much more interested in kind of green infrastructure, and they recognized that like they were very extremely vulnerable. They didn't have a lot of, like, there's not areas they can retreat necessarily. Yes, I said the R word. But like they kind of developed something very different, right, as you would expect from the Northeast. Right, and so the solutions that are identified, again, have that wide range, and they're everything from, build infrastructure, right, whether it be seawalls or dunes and pumping stations and the like, to, utilizing more green infrastructure and, doing that creatively. Right, but we're not just talking about kind of like things we can build and things that cost a lot of money. We're also talking about doing kind of doing your planning, doing it a little differently, doing stewardship of your resources differently, doing workforce development, doing outreach and education. Right, these are all aspects of resilience. Again, particularly when we have now entered I will call a low funding environment now that the federal government is stepping back from a lot of this work. And so, right, those action plans focus on reducing the risk of flooding and other hazards, and kind of do so in different ways. To date, we've worked with over 40 municipalities. We just closed another funding opportunity where if we're able to fund everybody who applied, we would double the size of that in the next 2 years. So 500 more towns to go. We have a lot in New Jersey. But one of the things that was most important to us was, right, I'm a planner. I think planning is incredibly important. To some extent, I think it's fun. But if we develop plans that just sit on the kind of proverbial shelf collecting dust, then there was no point in doing that work. So part of the Resilient NJ program is that we help towns kind of move some of the actions in those plans to implementation. And in a lot of cases over the last 2 years, that was focused significantly on federal grant applications. And they were very successful. They're not all identified here, but those applications brought in over $26 million in implementation funds, right? And we're not talking about building giant seawalls or gates, but they're kind of smaller projects in these communities that would have, a noticeable impact on their communities and help with resilience. And then the federal government canceled or announced the cancellation of many of those programs, most noticeably the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, BRIC. Aside from kind of the $26 million in awards that had already been made, right, a significant effort had gone into developing additional projects and grant applications, and so there was a very significant impact to the work that we had underway beyond even those projects that had already been awarded. So one of the other things that we try and do with Resilient NJ is help communities develop what is termed by our legislature as a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment. It is a mouthful. It is not an easy to remember acronym. But this was adopted into the municipal land use law back in 2021. Right now, every municipality, when they update their master plan, is now required to incorporate one of these vulnerability assessments, right, which helps them kind of understand the baseline for what is vulnerable, and then they have to think about what they want to do about it. It is not remotely as detailed or comprehensive as the work that we do, but every time we work with a town, we do develop these plans for them to incorporate into their master plans. I mentioned that we have a online local planning toolkit. Right. Again, I would love to work with all 564 municipalities in New Jersey, but we don't have the resources for that. So when local governments want to do this work, we have this toolkit that is extremely resource heavy to help them go through this process. It is set out in a logical planning process. Those are those kind of ovals across the top there. And there's a lot of resources there to help those communities kind of go through that process. It is written, intentionally written for what I term the informed volunteer. So think about your environmental commission members or your planning board members, right? You should not need to hire a consultant to do this work.
Did you reference Sustainable Jersey? They have.
Yes. Sustainable Jersey, where they have resilience actions within their certification program, are referenced here. I will note that we are about to kick off an update of this. It is now a little bit out of date, so we will be kicking off that process in the new year. But the resources here, there's probably too many resources. Frankly, it can be a bit overwhelming. Is the feedback that we're getting? So we'll look to streamline it a little bit. One of the other resources that we've developed as part of the Resilient NJ program is a climate resilience funding directory, right? So you want to move forward with a plan, you want to move forward with a project, you want to move forward with some analysis. We seek to identify every single funding source that we can in this directory, right? So it's constantly updated. Again, we developed this back when the federal government had a lot more coming out, and that was the intent. But as every time we see even kind of private funding coming out, we're including every action in here that we can. The Blue Acres program is another program that is run directly out of my office, and so the Blue Acres program is a voluntary residential buyout program for flood-prone and flood-impacted properties. It's been around since 1995. Since that time, it has purchased about 1,200 properties statewide. What you see on screen is in Down Township on the Delaware Bay, and it's just an example of kind of where there are some homes literally over the water, right? And those they were purchased, demolished, and when we buy a home, that property is preserved permanently as open space. This is that process. We are still significantly funded by the federal government, but we do have annual state funding through the Garden State Preservation Trust, which is really critical for us. One of the things that we have learned in the last few years is that using federal funding, going through that process takes years. We still don't have full approvals from FEMA and HUD on grant applications we submitted after Hurricane Ida back in 2021. State funding gets us there much quicker, right? It's still not as fast as kind of like just you going out and buying, but it is something that happens in months instead of years. Excuse me. We have done some buyouts in Monmouth County, not many. Here's some examples of those that are in Keensburg. That's the before and after. Those are the properties that were acquired. And again, after we buy these, right, they are permanently preserved open space. But what we are doing is moving forward, and this is a slight evolution of the program, and trying to ensure that they don't just become overgrown lots, where people are illicitly dumping their trash or parking their cars, right? We want these properties to be a positive community asset. We want them to have, we want to restore them to some natural level that we can. These pictures here are of properties that we acquired up in Woodbridge. And this was a decent number of them, and so we were able to kind of really do significant restoration in partnership with Rutgers. All right, coming to the end. Right, communicating risk from these impacts is also really important. So you may or may not be aware that New Jersey adopted in the last 2 years one of the strongest flood disclosure laws in the country. And what that now requires is whether you're buying or selling or just renting a property, the rentee, the person renting it out and the person selling the property now has to disclose in your contracts or your leases, one, kind of whether you are in a flood-prone area, and we've, again, developed the mapping to help identify that, but also whether they've experienced any flooding, right? And that's everything from, yes, we had, water in the basement from this event to, yes, we submitted flood claims to FEMA. This is really, really important. Kind of what we see after what we had been seeing after significant events is that kind of people would come into towns, buy properties on the cheap immediately after an event, help people just wanted out, and they would flip it and sell it right back. And the people who were buying those homes had no idea that it was flood prone, let alone it had just experienced a disaster. Now they would at least understand what they're getting themselves into. We also have more innovative ways for risk communications. We have a community-based art grant program that pairs community-based organizations through the New Jersey Council on the Arts with artists, and they've done multiple types of art installations, from sculpture to kind of work around down in Barnegat, kind of developed a map with pervious material. There was, and through the Monmouth County Arts Foundation, a dance program, which, for what it's worth, we timed this perfectly. There was a storm that rolled in literally as the event ended, and it just opened up into a downpour. We timed it really well. We also have what's called My Coast New Jersey. My Coast is statewide, but it is, it has a connotation to it, which is it's a website, it's an app where you can go and take a photo of something that's flooding or your favorite place, whatever it may be, and your phone's geolocated. It's linked to the nearest tide gauge. It's linked to the weather when you take the photo. You can go online and see every photo that's been taken, and see the map of where they are. And that helps people understand, one, that it's not just flooding kind of where it's flooding. It's happening everywhere, but it also helps us see kind of the data, of when it's flooding, and we're able to start making some of those connections and help communities understand, okay, well, this is flooding when this is the weather or when this is what the tide gauge says. We have set up in a couple places around the state, in state parks, photo stations, So you can, what we think is really cool about this is, you can put your phone in the same, everybody can put their phone in the same exact spot. You take the photo, and it effectively lets us track over time kind of what that specific site looks like. So it helps us kind of look at erosion and what we see kind of after certain events, and it comes along with informational signage. Now, kind of everything that I've touched on lately, over the last hour, I guess here, kind of we rolled up into our latest initiative called Building a Climate-Ready New Jersey. This was a $72 million grant award out of NOAA from their Climate Resilience Regional Challenge. This was obviously 2 years ago, and really kind of pulls all of these activities in with 15 partners across 16 counties in the state, and builds on them, starts to fill some of those gaps that we've identified, So most importantly, I think, is, we've done really good planning. In some cases, we're building cool stuff, impactful stuff in New Jersey, but there's this gap, of helping local governments move a project from concept and plan through, right, design and engineering and into construction, right? Everybody likes building stuff. Everybody likes, going out with their giant scissors and cutting the ribbons. But there's a whole lot of work that goes into kind of getting those projects to that point. And so that is a major gap that we'll be kind of seeking to fill through this process. There's a whole bunch of projects and activities here, right? We're actually building some stuff. We'll be doing up to 60 neighborhood scale green infrastructure projects in Paterson, Newark, and Perth Amboy. We'll be restoring some coastal marsh up in the Meadowlands. We'll be designing and constructing a new waterfront resilience park in Little Ferry. We'll be doing more regional resilience planning that I mentioned. We'll be doing one of the things I'm most excited about is a grant program with our 6 largest cities to support them hire their own chief resilience officer, right? Somebody who can focus on this full time. Right? This is their job. It's not, the local DPW guy who's also doing this. This is their job for over a 4-year period, right? We'll build out that design pipeline, and there's massive amounts of kind of education and awareness efforts, up and down the coast. So most of what I've talked about is referenced here. You can use the QR code to go to a site that looks just like this, and these are all links which you can then follow. There are some things here I haven't talked about, but this is kind of a resource for you to. We'll share the slides, but you didn't have to memorize every one of those projects and links. And this is my last slide, so I'll leave this up for folks, and I'm happy to take questions. So one of the things that we found was very clear from Sandy was that communities with mature dunes fared much better than those that did not, right? That is one of the significant successes of our post-Sandy work was, for all intents and purposes, we now have dunes along the entire length of the coast, right? Of various maturity and quality. And what we see kind of right every nor'easter, every time we have like a winter storm, they make a difference. There is also increasing significant erosion from those events. Right, we have agreements with the Army Corps to do beach replenishment. Again, the entire length of the coast, except 5 Mile Island, which is like the wildwoods. And typically, they come back every few years. But the erosion is happening faster now than it had been previously, and it's happening faster than the Corps can come back. So that is something that we've identified over the last 2 or 3 years that is now a struggle for us to figure out how we're going to address that issue. At the same time, some of the federal funding for beach replenishment, and which includes the dunes, I should say, has also been cut or scaled back or not included in funding bills. So it's for the coastal communities, it is a significant and increasingly costly issue that we don't have an answer for right now. New Jersey has a shore protection fund. So every year, $25 to $50 million. Right, every time we buy or sell a home, there's a realty transfer fee that goes into a state account. $25 to $50 million of that goes to New Jersey Shore Protection Program, which is also run out of New Jersey or DEP, and that's the program that works with the Army Corps to do the beach replenishment and dune work. But yeah, we're we're in a little bit of trouble here with figuring out how we're gonna pay for this.
Do you coordinate at all with Dr. Chris Broadkers? He's done a lot with green infrastructure.
Yeah, Chris, so I mentioned we're going to be doing those stormwater infrastructure projects in Newark, Patterson, and Perth Amboy. Chris is doing those. Chris also, not with me specifically, but with another office within DEP, he's under contract to provide direct technical assistance to communities, helping them identify kind of where they need stormwater management and help them, for everybody else's edification, right, help them identify and design stormwater green infrastructure projects to manage that stormwater.
Was he involved in the Two Rivers?
No. So I personally, we just started working with Chris in the last 2 years, where we kind of found the opportunity based on kind of his work and the funding that we were seeking. But he's been working with other parts of the department for a few years now. In the back.
Hi, did you say what green infrastructure was?
So sure.
What about?
Yeah. All right. So green infrastructure can be anything from planting trees to rain gardens to swales, right? To oversimplify, it can also be things like living shorelines. Some people consider dunes, right, green infrastructure. It's really, the term is most frequently used when we talk about stormwater management, but it is something that we're frequently using that terminology when we talk about resilience more generally, right? And it's, particularly again, post-Sandy, a lot of times we're talking about living shorelines, right? And it's using natural materials, natural systems, instead of rock and concrete and metal to kind of serve the same purpose, but has like those additional benefits, right? As it helps our water quality, it creates habitat inland and kind of marine. So it has a lot of, and in some cases, right, can also be open space and recreational, right? It's just kind of a dealing with these issues using natural systems and the natural infrastructure instead of kind of engineered gray infrastructure.
Maybe it just slows down the water to try to keep it there.
Right, it has, right, again, from stormwater perspective, stormwater management in New Jersey is really based on water quality, right? It is out of FEMA, and that is the focus. But we also recognize that kind of, right, part of the purpose of it is to slow down the water, right, and help it recharge and not just kind of, run across impervious and we recognize that by doing so and doing these water quality, positive impact water quality projects, it also results in less flooding, right? So we kind of take advantage of, right, the water quality issues, the EPA issues, and utilize that from a stormwater perspective, right? We also, again, have started kind of looking at, green infrastructure, right, as coastal marsh restoration, right, and living shorelines, again, right, kind of using the natural material to instead of kind of that hard gray infrastructure.
How do we get municipalities to take some of this stuff more seriously? For instance, there's a bunch I know of that recently passed resolutions, objecting to the real proposals.
When you figure that one out, please let me know.
Pitchforks and shovels.
I mean, I think the struggle for our local governments is, well, there's several, right? Most of them don't have the capacity or expertise to handle most of this, right? They're, dealing with making sure the garbage gets picked up and making sure, like, your taxes can only go up 2% every year, and making sure that the health benefits costs don't go up too high, and all the 5,000 things that local governments do. And we have a lot of very, very small governments who, right, are have even less capacity than most. And so everything that I've talked about here, it costs money, right? Let's be honest about that. Nothing here is free, and it's difficult for local governments to do this work, even if they understand it and even if they want to. It's part of the reason why most of the focus of my work is that local planning and technical assistance, right? To kind of point out like how difficult it is for them to do this and the lack of capacity they have. Even when I give towns grants, they can't manage the grant, right? Like people are still doing like timesheets like on pen and paper, and like it's difficult to meet federal grant requirements and demonstrate to us every hour that somebody is spending on this and what is their salary and what's their rate and how much is going to fringe and indirect, it's a lot for them to handle. Now, whether they want to take it seriously is a whole nother question. The real rules, those are the coastal rules that I mentioned. It is not, building 4 feet higher is not a little thing, right? We recognize that. And it is going to have an impact on the communities where that occurs. There are also costs associated with that, even right for each individual. But in the long run, we know, this is not a question, we know it pays off, right? Depending on what studies you want to read, right? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce released, not a bunch of tree huggers, right? Released 2 reports in the last 2 years that every dollar you invest in climate resilience results in $13 in benefits. And every dollar you don't invest now is $33 less in economic activity in the future. That's a hell of a return on investment. But it still, right, still has some upfront costs. And I think I'll put aside if there's kind of climate denial kind of issues here. It's difficult to do. And New Jersey is one of a shrinking number of states on the East Coast that does not have a stable funding source to support state government and your communities do this work. Right, we do 25 to 50 million a year for beaches. We do, I get at max, I think about 20 a year for Blue Acres, right? Houses are expensive in New Jersey, it doesn't go real far. And that's pretty much the only stable source of funding for resilience-related work. So unless and until the legislature decides that it's going to invest in this work, we're going to be perpetually kind of struggling and getting local governments to buy in to do the work. Whether they believe it or not, they're going to struggle to do the work.
Funding back then, because the EPA back then under Biden had allocated millions and millions and millions of dollars to do projects like that. So I had found all the links and everything for these projects to be funded. But at this point, with the new government that we have federally, I don't even know if that funding still exists. But the project that I put together still exists. And I'm working with the Shade Tree Commission, but I don't know, and they say that they can't, in their name, put it forward to the committee. But, I am very excited to find out that there's a
so I'll say that,
Answer, let me know.
I mean, if you're, I don't know if my email is up there, but or an email is up there, but you're happy to send it our way, I think, not knowing exactly what the project is, at a minimum, I can perhaps point you in the right direction. And I'll note three things, right? So I mentioned we have the Climate Resilience Funding Directory. So you should be able to go in there if there's any available, state, federal, private funding that makes sense for the type of project you're looking at. It should be identified in there, right? And so help you kind of identify the potential funding source. New Jersey does have, New Jersey is part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, right? It is a multi-state greenhouse gas mitigation program, on industrial major polluters, electricity producing polluters, and brings in a couple tens of millions a year to New Jersey. It is very, very, very focused on the greenhouse gas mitigation aspect of climate change, but 10% of what comes in has to go towards forest and coastal marsh restoration. And so usually using those funds, we have a Natural Climate Solutions grant program. And so tree planting is something that is funded regularly through that program. It should be in the directory, but you should also be able to find that on its own. The third thing I should mention, right, I just went and told you guys how expensive and difficult this is. It doesn't have to be, right, not everything has to be big and difficult and expensive, right? Planting a tree is a resilience action, right? Building a rain garden is a resilience action. It's not gonna stop Sandy or Ida, but it's gonna have an impact on some of these smaller storms that are still having kind of a negative impact on your community. And so climate change itself can be very overwhelming. Kind of some of the work that we do can be very large and overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be, right? You can do these tiny little things that will have a difference in your community, will help kind of bring the community together around these issues, gives you an opportunity to talk about these issues. And so, right, nobody's asked this yet, but I usually get a question like kind of, what can I do about it? Well, that's something you can do about it, right? That is something it also adds the benefit of giving you the opportunity to tell your town to, get up and do something. So again, right, we don't have to build giant seawalls and floodgates to make a difference in resilience in our communities. We can do these small things that also have significant kind of secondary benefits, right? It's shade, it's beautification, it's habitat, it's water quality, right? Trees are a pretty amazing infrastructure for climate resilience. Say again?
What is the kind of work that you're doing in the Meadowlands?
So in the Meadowlands, there's three specific projects I'll mention, right? So I mentioned one of the last slides was there's a watershed management area up there called Sawmill Creek. And so we're working with them to restore the coastal wetlands there. We're also going to be working with the region, the entire multi-municipal region there, to develop a strategic plan for how they want to, not, and again, in the level of detail that we do through the program, through Resilient NJ, but bring the towns together to help them understand kind of what they might want to do about it. And again, not in my office, literally the office next door though, there's the Rebuild by Design projects. And so that's two fairly significant design and construction infrastructure projects that were funded after Hurricane Sandy. And in the Meadowlands, again, this sounds really sexy, but there's something called the East Riser Ditch that they are installing both a pump station, because right, the Meadowlands is a bowl, so when Sandy came in, it kind of flooded and didn't go anywhere. So that what this will do is kind of help drain the area faster, but it'll also kind of turn that ditch back into a more natural state. So that's a construction project that is, I think, finishing design right now.
Thank you.
And thanks Thanks for the Monmouth-specific slides and information. And thank you for the questions about green infrastructure. Chris Abrupta will actually be joining us this winter to talk about green infrastructure and how you can implement it in your properties. And we have a few announcements now. And so Soraya is going to give an announcement for the League of Women Voters and relevant for students. And I believe we'll be having an announcement about from the Sierra Club.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Shreya Sai, and I am a student at Colts Neck High School. I'm here tonight representing the League of Women Voters of Monmouth County, an organization that has shaped me more than I ever expected when I first joined. Over the past few years, I've worked with the League on a variety of civic engagement projects. I've helped co-host candidate forums, including the Congressional District 6 Forum, which showed me what nonpartisan democracy looks like in action. I also organized a voter registration drive at my school, and last year I founded my school chapter, My School Votes, which is affiliated with the League. Our goal is simple. It is to educate and inspire everyone, including students, to become more engaged and informed participants in our democracy. Volunteering with the League has been one of the most meaningful parts of my high school experience. It has taught me that civic engagement is for everyone. The League has trusted me with real responsibility, supported my ideas, and shown me that anyone, regardless of age or background, can make a difference when they choose to get involved. Getting involved with the League is important because it opens the door to understanding how our government actually works. It gives people the chance to meet local leaders, ask thoughtful questions, and how to advocate respectively and effectively. More importantly, it shows us that democracy depends on all of us working together. I'm incredibly grateful to the members of the League for their mentorship and encouragement. They've helped me grow as a public speaker, a leader, and a citizen. Being here at Brookdale, speaking with all of you is an opportunity that I'm very thankful for. And before I end, I just want to point out that we have a table in the back. So if any of you have any questions or want to learn about any volunteering opportunities, I will be there. Thank you for having me tonight. We also have pocketbook constitutions that we are handing out if any of you are interested. So, thank you.
Thank you, Shreya. Do we have one more announcement?
On the table in front of all of you is a one-pager that has a QR code. I know I walked around and others did earlier. Be sure that you scan the QR code and take action on this really important bill, 100% clean energy by 2035. We need to get this passed in the next 2 months in lame duck session. So it's time to scan the QR code and submit your petition. Thank you.
Have a great holiday, and we'll see you again in the winter.
Thank you for a great talk. I met Sean the other day. It was interesting, especially with Sean.
Oh, yeah?